You ever notice how some towns are quiet in a way that doesn't feel peaceful? More like a held breath? Norton Shores, Michigan, was one of those places. A little coastal town tucked between Lake Michigan's gray horizon and the kind of people who leave their porch lights on but don't always answer the door. On most nights, the hum of the highway was the loudest thing you could hear. Gas stations buzzed under fluorescent halos, and the same people made the same small talk that had been recycled for decades. But on the night of April 26, 2013, that sound, the hum, the stillness was broken. A scream didn't echo exactly. It was more like it was swallowed by the dark, absorbed before it could find help. By morning, the whole town would be asking the same question. Where's Jessica? And that's the kind of question small towns aren't built to answer. Welcome to small town murder. You think you know your neighbors, until one of them vanishes between the price tags and the pump lights. Norton Shores wasn't the kind of place you'd expect to host national headlines. It wasn't the kind of town that made you lock your doors twice or look over your shoulder. It was the kind of place people passed through on the way to somewhere more important. But Jessica Heeringa wasn't passing through. She lived there, worked there, trusted there. She was 25, a young mother with a smile that could soften even the grumpiest old regulars at the Exxon gas station where she worked the late shift. Everyone in town knew Jess. She was a friendly face behind the counter at night, the one who'd still smile after a 10-hour shift, her hair pulled up in a messy bun, that tired but kind look that said she was doing her best in a world that rarely noticed. And maybe that's the cruelest thing about small towns. They notice everything except what matters. The last night anyone saw Jessica, the station was quiet, too quiet. The cameras didn't work, because of course they didn't. The night clerk before her had mentioned it a dozen times. But in small towns, safety is a budget issue until it's a headline. Around 10:55 p.m., a silver van was spotted in the parking lot. Not by surveillance, not by some omniscient eye in the sky, by people, real and perfect people. One witness said it was a Chrysler Town and Country. Another swore it was a Dodge Caravan. You can almost hear the argument over coffee later. No, it had square lights. I know what I saw. But what they didn't see, what no one ever saw, was Jessica leave. When the next customer pulled up around 11:10 p.m., the lights were still on. Jessica's purse was still behind the counter, and the cash drawer was open. But Jessica was gone, just like that, gone. And here's the thing about gone in a small town. It's a word that starts as confusion and ends as legend. The cops were called, of course. The kind of call that starts with, hey, this might sound weird, but, and end with a dozen patrol cars lighting up a sleepy street that had never seen this much blue and red in its life. They searched the lot, the dumpster, the storage room. Nothing. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood. Just absence. That hollow, echoing absence that feels wrong even when you can't say why. But there's one thing. One faint trail of oil spots leading from the pumps out toward the street. It was like breadcrumbs, mechanical ones. And the kind of clue that tells you, whatever happened here didn't walk away on its own. Before that night, Norton Shores was the kind of town where people left their keys in the ignition while grabbing milk. After that night, no one filled up alone. The police started with the usual. Boyfriends, family, coworkers. The kind of questions that sting even when they're routine. Was she unhappy? Did she ever mention leaving? Anyone bothering her? Her boyfriend, Dean, looked broken when he spoke to reporters. He wasn't polished, not media smooth. Just raw. You could see the fear in his eyes, that mix of guilt and disbelief that comes from realizing your ordinary life just got rewritten as a tragedy. Jessica's mom, Shelley, couldn't stop pacing during interviews. You could tell she was the kind of mom who never stopped worrying, even before there was a reason to. Now she had the worst reason imaginable. And through it all, the town whispered. Small towns are great at whispering. It started with things like, she must have known him, or maybe she left on her own. Because that's easier to believe, right? That someone chose to disappear, rather than was taken from under bright fluorescent lights and gods in different gaze. But people don't just walk away mid-shift, not with their purse, their money, and their family waiting. That's when rumors started wrapping around a name. A man who had been seen in that area before. A man who made women uncomfortable. A man who owned a van. His name would later echo across headlines and courtrooms. Jeffrey Willis. But at that moment in the early days, he was just that guy with the van. And here's where the absurdity of small-town murder creeps in. Everyone knew someone who knew him. He'd fix their computer, clean their pool, help move a couch. Normal, right? That's how evil hides in the normal. He was polite, talkative, maybe a bit odd. He didn't seem like the kind of man who would hunt someone down. But then again, who does? The town tried to go back to normal. But normal had already packed up and left. The Exxon station changed shifts. People stopped going there after dark. The lot became a ghost light in the night, a reminder that something awful had happened under that flickering canopy. Search parties formed. They combed the woods, fields, drainage ditches. The news vans came next because nothing says we care like reporters blocking the same parking lot where it all started. Jessica's face was everywhere, on flyers, lampposts, local TV. A young mother's smile frozen in time, printed in hopeful colors that faded in the rain. Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. Nothing, just silence and suspicion. Here's the part no one talks about. When a small town loses someone, it's not just grief, it's paranoia. Everyone starts side-eyeing everyone. The friendly neighbor who waves too much, the quiet guy with a van, the co-worker who stays late. People start building monsters out of memories. And sometimes they're right. But before any arrest, before any confession, before the name Jeffrey Willis meant anything, there was just that gas station, that haunting, empty image of a life interrupted mid-sentence. Some say they still can't drive past it without feeling something heavy in their chest. The funny thing about these stories is that they never really end where they start. They spiral, slowly, painfully, until the whole truth crawls into the light, piece by awful piece. And in this case, the darkness wasn't done, not by a long shot, because what happened to Jessica Heeringa was only the beginning. You'd think after something like that, the town would stop pretending everything was normal. But small towns have this weird muscle memory. They bounce back into routine, even when the air still tastes like fear. Norton Shores went back to mowing lawns, hosting church picnics, arguing about taxes. It's not denial exactly, it's survival. The kind that says, if we keep moving, maybe the darkness won't notice us. But the darkness had already noticed. Jessica Heeringa's disappearance wasn't just a headline now, it was a story. And in a place like this, one story is enough to redefine an entire town. You could see it in the way people talked. Everyone had an opinion, even the ones who swore they didn't gossip. The barbershop buzzed louder than the clippers. The diner's coffee grew colder as whispers brewed stronger. One old-timer at the counter was quoted saying, "I always said nothing good happens after 10 p.m. at a gas station. Should have been closed by then." Another chimed in, "My niece used to work there. Quit after some guy kept asking if she was alone at night." That's the thing about hindsight. It's always brave and late. The gas station itself became a landmark of discomfort. The Exxon sign still glowed, but now it lit up fear. Drivers slowed down as they passed. Some stopped to pray. Others rolled through faster, pretending not to look. It was no longer a place to buy gas. It was a shrine built by silence. The new clerks never stayed long. Every time someone took the night shift, the same thing happened. Within weeks, they'd quit. Said the hours were too long. Said the pay wasn't worth the stares. But the truth? You could feel something there. Not supernatural, psychological. Like the walls themselves remembered her name. When the first week passed with no news, the posters went up. When the first month passed, the reward doubled. When the first year passed, the hope didn't disappear. It just changed shape. People still left flowers near the pumps. Sometimes a candle, sometimes a note. And then came the sightings. Someone swore they saw her in Muskegon. Another said they spotted her in Grand Rapids. There was even a rumor she'd been trafficked, living somewhere under a new name. Hope in its desperate form will believe in anything but death. But the detectives didn't believe in ghosts. They believed in evidence. And they didn't have much. The Exxon station had no working cameras, no recording devices, no eyewitnesses who saw the abduction itself. Just that silver van, the one nobody could agree on. Still, one detail kept popping up. A man seen lurking around, mid-30s to 40s, stocky build, sandy hair, pale eyes. The kind of face that disappears into crowds because it's so average it's forgettable. But the more people talked, the more they remembered. The odd guy, the one who lingered too long at the counter. The one who made casual comments that didn't feel casual. Everyone knew someone like that. But one man fit the description too well. Jeffrey Willis. To say his name now is to conjure something cold. But back then he was just Jeff. He lived in Muskegon, just 10 minutes from the gas station. Had a job, a wife, 2 kids, a normal enough life, the kind that earns you invisibility. If evil had to resume, his would have been spotless. He worked as a maintenance tech. Quiet, reliable, boring. And boring's the perfect disguise for a monster. People remembered he drove a silver van. They remembered how he sometimes stopped by late at night, buying nothing but an energy drink or gum. He talked too much or not at all. His eyes had that offbeat shine, too interested, too aware. But no one said anything back then. Why would they? In small towns, people mind their business, even when their business is screaming for attention. Meanwhile, the Heeringa family was unraveling. Shelley, her mother, turned every waking hour into search time. Flyers, interviews, town meetings. She became both detective and anchor in a storm no parent should have to weather. Jessica's boyfriend was grilled publicly and privately. The cops always start with the people closest to the victim. It's logical, procedural, cruelly predictable. They asked where he was, what they'd argued about last, how things had been at home. He had no answers they wanted, because no matter how you phrase it, "I don't know where she is," never sounds innocent enough. Every news update felt like a small funeral. The press didn't help. They never do. They'd interview anyone who could talk and cut it down to 20 seconds of tragedy in small-town Michigan. The story spread nationally for a while. Then new headlines replaced it. Louder ones, bloodier ones. The kind that make producers forget the faces that went missing the month before. But the locals never forgot. In Norton Shores, Jessica's name wasn't a news story. It was a wound. 2 years passed, then 3. People stopped expecting her to walk through the door. The posters faded. The gas station got remodeled. Time, that cruel eraser, did its work. But then in May of 2016, 3 years after Jessica vanished, something happened. Something that shattered the illusion that Norton Shores had moved on. Another young woman went missing nearby. Her name was Rebecca Bletch. She didn't vanish from a gas station. She was shot while jogging. Shot in broad daylight. And police found shell casings from a .22 caliber pistol. No robbery. No sexual assault. Just death, quick, clean, senseless. It was horrifying and familiar, because sometimes evil doesn't stop at one. When police caught the man responsible, the shock was instant. The face on the news wasn't a stranger. It was that same name that had drifted through the Heeringa investigation years before. Jeffrey Willis, the silver van, the same cold, ordinary man. Inside that van, police found a .22 Ruger pistol, a stun gun, rope handcuffs, syringes filled with liquid. And this one still makes detectives shiver. A list. A hit list, they called it. Women's names, notes, and GPS coordinates. Jessica Heeringa's name was on it. 3 years later, and her story came roaring back to life. Only this time, it wasn't a missing persons case. It was something far darker. The cops went back to that same parking lot. They walked the same pavement, studied the same camera mounts that never worked. But now they had a name and a reason. Jeffrey Willis wasn't just a suspect anymore. He was the living embodiment of every small-town fear people whisper, but never say out loud. That monsters don't come from outside. They grow right here, in the houses next door. And the scariest part? He didn't look the part. He never does. If you lived in Norton Shores back then, you'd know what the air felt like. Heavy, nervous, waiting for the next shoe to drop. People realized the gas station wasn't cursed. It was haunted by truth. That Jessica's disappearance wasn't random. That someone had stalked her, studied her, waited for the perfect moment. And when they finally pieced it together, the van, the weapon, the pattern, it wasn't closure. It was nausea, because it meant she never had a chance. It's strange how small towns pretend to heal. They repaint, repave, rebrand. They tell themselves time will fade the horror, but it doesn't. Every time you stop for gas, every time you see a van idle too long, every time a young woman looks over her shoulder in the night, Jessica's story flickers back to life. Because the truth is, evil doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it hums quietly under fluorescent light. And in Norton Shores, it hummed for years before anyone listened. But this wasn't the end. Because when police dug deeper into Jeffrey Willis, they found more than evidence. They found history. And what they uncovered next proved that Jessica Heeringa's case wasn't an isolated act of violence. It was a pattern or ritual, and it had been going on much longer than anyone dared to imagine. Before Jessica became a headline, she was just Jess, the kind of woman who made ordinary life look almost noble. She worked nights because night work fit around her son's schedule. Her little boy was barely 3, a mop-haired, giggling toddler who called her Mama Jess. She'd sleep a few hours after sunrise, make him pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, then drive him to her mom's house before heading back for another shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and she was proud of that. Jessica had plans, small ones that sounded big when you didn't have much. Save enough to move into a better place. Maybe go back to school. Something in design, she once told a coworker. Sketching flowers in the corner of a receipt. I like making things pretty. Even gas stations deserve a little color. That's who she was, the person who could find softness in fluorescent light. People who knew her still talk about that smile. Not the big kind that photographs like a commercial, but the small, genuine curve that appeared when she meant it. She wasn't naive, though. Not anymore. Life had already introduced her to disappointment, wrapped in cheap love and late apologies. Her relationship with Dean was complicated. Love mixed with exhaustion. Bills, childcare, long shifts. They'll crush romance faster than infidelity. Still, they were trying. There were days they laughed. Days she believed everything would get easier once they caught a break. But the truth? The break never came. And in small towns, hope sometimes feels like the cruelest habit. At work, Jessica was the kind of employee managers loved because she never complained. The kind customers noticed because she remembered things, kids' names, favorite snacks, even who smoked menthols versus regulars. The late-night crowd was its own ecosystem. Truckers, insomniac shift workers, teenagers chasing caffeine. Jess handled them all the same. Polite, alert, cautious. There was one rule she repeated to herself every shift. Stay in the light. The pumps, the counter, the glass. As long as she stayed where people could see her, she was fine. Except on that final night. The only witness was the dark. If you'd asked anyone back then who could ever hurt Jessica, they'd laugh it off. Nobody, they'd say. Everybody loves that girl. But everybody doesn't mean safe. It just means visible. And being visible can be dangerous when the wrong eyes are watching. Jeffrey Willis had been watching. People remembered seeing him stop by weeks before the abduction, buying gas he didn't need, striking up hollow conversations. One clerk said he always parked too close to the store windows, like he wanted a reflection more than a purchase. No one thought much of it. Creepy maybe. But creepy wasn't a crime. The cruel math of hindsight is realizing how many creepy, but harmless, people weren't harmless at all. Jessica's coworkers would later replay those nights in their heads, looking for signs they missed. She mentioned a guy who made her nervous. One said, "She told me he kept asking what time she got off," another added. But at the time, it sounded like the kind of story women trade every day. The uncomfortable comment, the too long stare, the uneasy laugh that says, "Let's not make a scene." It's remarkable how much danger hides behind politeness. Outside the station, life in Norton Shores kept humming. The town looked like something from an old postcard, tree-lined streets, ice cream stands in summer, church bells that rang slightly off-key. Everyone waved, everyone gossiped. But under that friendliness was the same tension that lives in every small place. Everyone knows your business, but no one truly knows you. People like to say, "Nothing bad happens here." They'd say it even after Jessica vanished, as if repetition could rewrite reality. It's not that they didn't care. They just didn't want to believe their comfort had cracks. In those early months, Jessica's absence hung over everything. Dean couldn't bear to stay in their apartment. He moved in with relatives, keeping his son close and his phone closer. The child would ask for his mother every night in that small, matter-of-fact way only children can manage. "Where's Mama Jess?" No one knew how to answer. Shelley filled her days with purpose. She coordinated search teams, printed flyers, scoured social media. She learned to talk to reporters like they were both allies and vultures. Because sometimes they were. When exhaustion finally caught up, she'd sit in Jessica's old room and whisper prayers into the silence, as if God could be persuaded by persistence. The investigators, meanwhile, were burning out on leads that went nowhere. A silver van here, a vague description there. Every tip ended the same way. Dead. One officer described it later. It felt like chasing smoke. You can see it, smell it, but you can't hold it. The chief promised updates at town meetings, and people showed up with casseroles and folded arms. The conversations always started hopeful and ended angry. Somebody always muttered, "If this were a rich family, she'd have been found by now." Justice, like everything else, moves faster where money flows. Norton Shores learned that the hard way. Jessica's friends clung to normalcy. They organized fundraisers at the bowling alley, wore purple ribbons, hosted vigils. The first vigil drew half the town. The fifth drew a handful. Grief fatigue, they called it. People can only stare into the dark for so long before they look away. But her mother never looked away. Shelley once told a reporter, "She's not gone. Someone took her." And that sentence changed everything. It shifted Jessica from missing person to victim, an acknowledgement that evil had agency. That's when the whispers about Jeffrey Willis started resurfacing. He'd worked maintenance at a local factory, often night shifts. He'd even volunteered once at a community event. Nobody thought of him as dangerous, but everyone agreed he was off, the kind of man who smiled a beat too long. When police questioned him casually during the early phase, he was cooperative, friendly. His alibi seemed clean. His van? Searched once, superficially and dismissed. Later, detectives recalled that the mistake that haunted them most. For Jessica, the world before that April night was small but full. She had a son she adored, a mother who refused to give up on her, and a quiet resilience that made others feel braver. She wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She just wanted stability, something solid in a life that had been mostly shifting sand. That's what makes her story so cruel. Evil didn't choose her because of who she was. It chose her because she was there, because she trusted that the ordinary world was safe, and the ordinary world betrayed her. If you ask the old residents now, they'll say they remember the last time they saw her. Every detail. That's what trauma does. It brands memories with false clarity. One man swore she waved at him from the doorway that night. Another said he heard a shout, though none of the logs show a single 911 call until minutes later. Memory rewrites itself until it makes sense. But in this story, sense never came. All that remained were pieces, her belongings, her routine, her reputation, and the echo of a life cut off mid-sentence. Every once in a while, someone still drives through Norton Shores and stops at that same station. They'll notice the new paint, the new sign, the brighter lights, and then they'll glance down at the concrete, half expecting to see something written there, something that says, "She was here." That's the thing about places like this. They don't forget. They just pretend better. Looking back now, it feels inevitable. That collision between Jessica's trust and Willis's hunger. But inevitability is just the illusion we invent after tragedy. The lie that says, we should have known. The truth is simpler and harsher. She couldn't have known. None of them could. And while Jessica was building a life around love, Willis was building one around obsession. Her world was pancakes and paychecks. His was fantasies and control. Their paths crossed once, maybe twice. That was all it took. When I think about her now, I try not to picture the gas station. I try to picture her laughing with her son, drawing little hearts on receipts, humming along to a song no one else could hear. Because that's the part of Jessica the world never really knew. The life behind the tragedy, the heartbeat behind the headline. And maybe that's why her story still hurts, because it reminds us how fragile safety is, and how easily it can be stolen by someone who looks like everyone else. But in Norton Shores, the calm never lasts. Because soon after the arrest of Jeffrey Willis, the truth about what he'd been hiding in that van, what he'd been filming, keeping, collecting, would drag this small town through a darkness deeper than anyone imagined. And when it all came out, people stopped calling it a mystery. They started calling it what it really was, a nightmare.